Hello, everybody. Welcome back to CV Freaks podcast. This is episode 14. I'm Eden, and this is Aditya, my special guest for today. Aditya from Animal Factory Amps over in Bombay, India. Hello.
Hey,
Hey.
how's it going?
Yeah, it's great. Thanks for joining me, even though it's 10 hours and 30 minutes ahead of time, so it's really late for you over there, which is pretty amazing.
That's okay. It's not that bad, and it's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's the
It's
biggest
pretty cool
time
to be here.
difference. It's crazy. Yeah. So, I met you in Super Booth. Maybe one of them, I can't remember, but I saw you at every Super Booth. And
Mhm.
the best
I
thing
think it
that
was 2017,
2017.
2017, and then all the superboots after that, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, because the first one was just kind of like learning about Super Booth and getting the vibe and the feet wet. And but yeah, the funniest thing that happened at your booth, I remember, was when Daniel Miller crept up behind us, and you're like, oh, "Look, it's Daniel Miller. This is Daniel Miller." I'm like, "Oh, I didn't really know who he was at the time, but now I do." Yeah, he's like,
Yeah.
and he gave a performance too. Remember, it was like super minimal.
I only caught 5 minutes about of that. I think of that performance, or maybe 10 minutes. I think it was at the end of Superbooth for the day, and he was performing outside on the lake,
Right.
on the water thing, and it was this very minimal, very like almost dreamy performance. I mean, that's the thing about the sad thing about Superbooth for me is that I don't see anything. I don't get to watch or hear anything because I'm always at my stall, and it's always funny because I'll go back to India and then somebody will say, "Hey, how was Superbooth? Did you see this? Oh my God, did they debut this? Did you get a glimpse of that?" I said, "I haven't seen anything. You know more than I do. I mean,
Yeah.
I've just been doing my thing."
But
So
your modules were so cool. Like they jumped out to me because they were so punky and like with the crazy skeletons and kind of pirate vibe, like the glowing eyes of the skeleton in the hat and stuff. It looked very like heavy metal or punky.
yeah, it's thanks. It was I think that was like probably in 2017 and 2018. And the one that you're talking about is actually the only design that hasn't been updated so far. Um, because I think around 2019 is when I started working with the new illustrator. 2018 actually. It's when I started working with somebody new who I share an office space with, and he's incredibly creative. And he kind of went through my stuff and he said, "You have a lot of things going on, but you don't have an aesthetic that flows through everything." Um, and he kind of changed that completely. So he's given it a more unified look. And the Baron Samdi, the module that you're talking about, is the only one that we are still too challenged by, I think, to break away from the old design
Hmm.
because it's become like it's actually one of the slowest selling pedals. I don't know why, but it's become too iconic to mess with in some sense. Um, I used to have a very different aesthetic than I have now, I think. If you've seen the new stuff, you'll see it's a lot more minimal and not as rock and roll, but still very um, what's the right word? Foreboding, maybe just a little like dark and industrial and organic mechanical or something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it looks great. The new one, the Aurobus, right?
yeah. Thank you. We actually. You're actually the first. This is the first place you'll see this, but because it hasn't shown anywhere else so far. But this is the new packaging that we've got for the Aurobus,
Yeah.
and because somebody actually said that we had some of the most beautiful packaging in the world, and we wanted to keep that going. So this is how people who get their Aurobus will receive their Aurobus. There's going to be a few different things over here. This is the module itself. So that's what it looks like.
Has tubes?
It has vacuum tubes, yeah. And the vacuum tubes will the vacuum tubes are these guys. Space on here. It's these vacuum tubes come from like 1957 or 58, if I'm not wrong.
Wow, that's old.
Yeah, they were built between. That's old. Yeah, it's almost as old as my parents, I think. So they were built in between 57 and 63, if I'm not wrong. So I don't have an exact date on these guys, but yeah. And that's what it looks like from the back. So it's been a fairly complex construction and a pretty involved one, because there's some manual, there's a lot of manual hand-wired stuff. There's a little bit of stuff that was put down by a machine, and then yeah, and there's quite a bit going on.
Oh wow! So the tubes you have to attach when you get it yourself?
That's right. Yeah.
And it's
I can't ship it with tubes.
It's a VCA, right? A dual VCA.
It's a dual VCA, but it's a lot more than that as well, because you have a lot of distortion and saturation that comes from, yeah. It wouldn't be Animal Factory if I didn't have it. If there wasn't some element of noise, I think. It's kind of like a nice saturator, and it can also become not so nice. It can get very, very nasty as well. And I mean, the circuit itself is actually really simple, and I have to credit. I think there were two things that really influenced the circuit. One was Eric Barber from Metasonics, and because I was always like a huge fan of Metasonics' work. I have never been able to afford any of his stuff, but his work was really inspiring in the sense that it said, just like try and think differently about vacuum tubes and what they can do and what they should do, and he just had a real devil may care attitude about it. If just because you don't like it, just because it's not aesthetically pleasing, doesn't mean it's not sonically useful in some sense. And there was that, and there were my own experiments that I did with this particular tube type when I started out building guitar amps. So I'm not from the modular space originally. Modular has been a very recent thing for me, but I started with pedals, and before that I was building vacuum tube amplifiers as a hobby. So that's where I started working with tubes.
Super cool. And what happens when you blow them? Like I don't know. I know that they're.
Oh, you just go out and buy another one.
Oh, that's it. Like they don't explode or something, right?
No. Tubes never explode. I mean, you have to. Not unless you pack it with dynamite or something. So tubes actually, when they overheat, they implode. But that's never going to happen to these guys, because you have to put a lot of serious voltage to make that happen. And what you're thinking of are the power tubes and power amplifiers. What they will usually do is just like kind of melt down, and once they start melting, little hole forms in the glass, and then the whole thing kind of just collapses on itself, and as soon as air enters, it kind of just burns out, and that's it. Tubes never explode. I don't think I've ever heard of an exploding tube till date. I could be wrong.
So those ones you have there, they're from the 1950s, you said. And how did you find
Roughly.
them? How did you find them if they're so old?
I think this started when I was like in 2008 or something. I started buying vacuum tubes. So I was, like I said, for a very different purpose. I was building vacuum tube amplifiers for guitar mostly, and I started going around looking for people who would sell me old tubes, and there wasn't much in the market, so it was already very scarce in India. Um, but I managed to get my hands on a small but decent sized collection of them, and I think I was actually thinking about doing vacuum tube amplifiers. So that's why there's amplification in animal factory amplification. So that I originally wanted to build amplifiers and sell those because that's what I loved at the time. And I mean, I still love vacuum tube amplifiers, but I kind of saw how it went for other people, and I just decided that there was no real demand and also no real business in tube amps. Um, it's also just in terms of prototyping and like building, like keeping parts and everything, holding inventory. It's a lot more expensive because you have to get a lot of specialized parts. You have to get a lot of transformers and a lot of things that need to be imported can get very expensive. So I don't know if you know this, but India is actually one of the most expensive places to import things into.
No, I didn't.
So it's crazy because we have a fairly protectionist government and have had it for years. So earlier you couldn't, like until the 80s, you couldn't import anything.
Oh,
It was just really, really hard. You had to get a whole bunch of special permissions from the government and go like just really jump through a lot of hoops, grease the right hands, and then you'd be allowed to import things. And now it's kind of gotten easier, so anybody can apply for the import export code, but it's still crazy expensive. So people are quite shocked when I say I pay like 45% or 35% on knobs and potentiometers and stuff like that. I mean, just like knobs, the ones that go on your synths. We pay like 40% import duty on that.
wow, it's kind of a lot.
It's insane, yeah.
Where do you import the tubes from then?
Oh, the tubes I found locally.
Oh,
I found
okay.
these tubes locally. I would not, I would, I mean, this was literally like just, I think, a few years of me going and digging around and asking people and getting deep into the electronics markets here, finding people who were associated with vacuum tubes back in the day, and then just trying to like buy whatever was possible. And at some point, it wasn't possible anymore because everything had already been exhausted. So there were people who like I'd heard stories about two mysterious Japanese people who would come every summer and just buy out all the tubes they saw.
Oh
Like
no.
it, yeah. So like people knew it wasn't a secret. People knew what the good stuff was, and they got their hands on it first. I think I bought whatever I could that was good and usable, and I just happened to get like somehow managed to find like a whole bunch of octal tubes, including the 6SG7s, and had to buy them by the lot, right? Right. It wasn't like I can say, "Hey, I want to buy 5." You say, "No, you got to take everything."
Oh wow.
So
So not.
I bought them and I just like stored them very carefully, and amazingly, it's just hard to believe that something was engineered so well back in the day because some of them do have rust on them, but they work beautifully.
Mm-hmm.
Others like these, they're both the same. They're both the same brand, but I don't know what the difference is. But this is like spotless. There's no indication that it was made in the 50s, and this is beautiful new old stock.
Crazy. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Can't believe that. The distortion module you had put out last year, the God Eater. Yeah, I love that. I mean, well, I love how the design looks, but I still have to get my hands on one to play it. But that's a distortion module.
We had thank you. It's yeah, the God Eater again. So the God Eater is based off the God Eater pedal, and it's a bass distortion module more specifically. It's it's great for general distortion as well. But where it really shines is the low end. So if you have like kicks or low toms or just like bass lines that you want to really beef up without like just maybe you use a fully distorted setting, but don't want to lose the low end. That's where the Gaudita comes in, because it's got a massive sub bass compression, and that's where it shines actually. I'm actually in the process of releasing the next batch, so I'm just putting on the final touches. It's pretty much identical to the old one, with a couple of small, tiny changes, mostly in the way the VCAs behave. So I've gone from linear from expo to linear. But other than that, it's sonically more or less identical, I guess. So I'm putting this out, I think in the next 4 weeks, roughly.
Oh, very good. So how many
Yeah.
people work on your team with you? You have a big team, small operation?
My team is tiny. I mean, it was until 2019, it was just me.
Oh,
so I think I actually hired my actual first proper hire happened. When did Dave join me? Dave joined me in about a month before I got married. That would be, I think, September or October 2019 is when I had my first employee. And it was one of those strange things. I mean, he knew nothing about synthesizers, absolutely nothing. And he was just kind of interested in the poker synth, which is the DIY project I created for a friend's event in Calcutta. We just started messaging each other, and it turned out that he was on the Bombay Chamber Orchestra, and the conductor of the Bombay Chamber Orchestra lived in my building, so he was a neighbor. And so I just asked him, "Hey, do you know him? How is he? How's he? Like, I haven't seen him in a while. Is he well?" And then we just started talking, and then he came over to the office. And the main thing that was, I think there were just 2 arguments that were there for me, because I really liked the fact that he had no idea about synthesizers at all, because that made it much more appealing. To have somebody who's actually kind of interested in everything else and not mesmerized by the object itself, or not hooked onto an idea of a synthesizer or something, because that's very much how it was like for me. He became a really good employee because I figured that if there's one thing that a classical musician can do, so he plays violin in the orchestra. It's doing boring things over and over again, repetitively, for long periods of time while staying focused. And I said, if you can do that, that's what you need to work at Animal Factory, because that's really what it is about 90% of the time. Just doing repetitive things that are also very boring without losing focus.
Because you guys do a lot by hand, like you said, like when you showed it, some is done by the machine and there's a lot by hand done too.
There's still a lot of I mean, in terms of quality control and final assembly and stuff, so that still very much happens in-house. And we're really, I mean, really strict about it, to the point that if I try to if I'm not paying attention and I say something's okay, then I get a bit of a slap on the wrist, because we had to come. I ended up, and this is the great thing about finding people like David, and now very recently Aaron and Chinmay have joined my team. So we're 3 people at this moment. David will leave to go back to school in a month, but one of the best things that actually happens through this is that when you find people with the right mindset to the work, And when you've kind of given them the guiding principle, and for me, the guiding principle has never been about, it's not about what I'm passionate about, but it's really about like, how is the customer going to feel about this? Are they going to be, okay, this is nice, or is it just like, is this something that brings intense joy and beauty to their lives, and we always want to be the second thing? So that's every now and then, if I'm not paying attention or if I'm distracted doing something else and I let something slip, somebody's out there to say, hey, how's the customer going to feel about that? And then I say, yeah, okay, you're right. And that's the best thing about this team that I have right now, because everybody's extremely professional. Everybody's very willing to let their own to put their passion second and put that guiding principle first. So I couldn't be happier at this point, really.
Yeah, the product looks amazing. The new box, shiny letters and stuff.
Yeah, thanks.
You have the little DIY one there too. I saw it on the website. It says it's for free download, the design, right?
Yeah, so it's gone through a few iterations actually. There's been this one which I made for a completely unrelated event,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just a very simple thing. It's a 555 based oscillator. Maybe you know of this. This is one of the most famous DIY circuits. It's called the Atari Punk Console.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty much the first circuit that synth enthusiasts end up building, and it's one of the most like it's very easy to build. It's very hard to mess up because the 555 clock chip, that's this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is actually two of them. It uses the 556. It's one of the oldest semiconductors ever, and it's very resilient to beginner mistakes, like say you put the power the wrong way or it goes in the wrong pin or something. None of that happens. And what I wanted to do with the Poker Synth was, it started like this. A friend of mine, he runs something called Synth Farm in Calcutta, which is a very limited capacity event. It's 20 people in a farmhouse in the outskirts of Calcutta in a small village, doing nothing but immersing themselves into synthesis for 3 days. And he had started the DIY thing, which was building stuff on breadboard for absolute beginners. And I said, that's cool, but I hate breadboards. I
Mm-hmm.
really, really hate breadboarding in the prototyping process and especially as a beginner, because there's so much that can go wrong. And if you don't have the electronics knowledge, it's very hard to debug it. So I kind of took it as a task to take the PokerSynth idea that he had and put it into a form that would be very easy for first timers to solder. Because at least with soldering, if the joints are correct and the circuit has been tested a bunch of times, then it's easy to figure out what goes wrong. And one of the years, in one of the editions, I actually was there myself, teaching them how to solder for the first time. And it kind of looks a little something like this. It's just laid out so that you have like an idea of you get to work with almost every part there is that is commonly used in electronics. And it allows you there's a lot of space around things, so you can solder without problems, which is another issue for beginners. And last but not least, there's no wiring. So the only wire there is for the battery. But the fact that there's no wiring makes just like everything very durable in terms of connections. So you can plug things in and out of jacks without worrying, oh, is this going to break? Is this going to be an issue? And it's worked great. And like I said, it's based off the 555, so that's very much in the public domain. Nobody owns the design. If people want to take the PCB files and make their own, that's perfectly fine by me. And I know it's kind of a condition that we had free to use in any way you like. I don't see that. It hasn't happened much. We've had a few downloads, but it's not like
people just don't know about it, I think, probably.
I mean, there's a lot of alternatives, right? There's some fantastic DIY beginner things out there.
Yeah. Wow.
So I think if you reached a certain level, this is a very, very simple one. Also, I don't offer any kits because I just don't have the time for that stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that makes it a little less popular.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it's just I hope whoever has like 30 or 40 people who have downloaded have gotten some joy out of it.
Mm-hmm.
One person got a job at Animal Factory out of it, so that's also cool. Yeah.
What is the Pit Viper module? I was looking at. That one's from the pedal design too. So it's a pedal first, then a module.
So the Pit Viper module is, so there's actually, so there's 3 modules that were pedals and then became modules. That would be the Pit Viper, the Baron Soundy, and the God Eater. The Pit Viper is actually the most straightforward of the modules, and I'm currently redesigning it because it's out of production at the moment. So the old Pit Viper has been discontinued. I'm trying to make it just like nicer to manufacture because the old one was just a mess of wires, actually. Well, not a mess, but relatively speaking, it was a little messy, and some of the stuff I wasn't very happy with later. It's just a very simple overdrive. It's just a distortion module, which doesn't really go into the space of the God Eater. I mean, the God Eater is much heavier and much beefier. The Pit Viper is more like it's a milder version of that, I guess. It's not even a version of that. It's just like a more kind of like a guitar amp kind of overdrive. So you can actually, like, a lot of stuff actually ends up sounding like guitar if you go through it. And then I added something quirky to that, to the pedal. It doesn't exist on the pedal. It only exists in the module, but like this triggered, I'm not even sure how to explain it. It's a feedback loop. So it creates strange oscillations, and there's a lot of wave shaping. So there's a very ragged sound that comes out of it. And it's a very simple module, but I'm hoping to give it a second life in the next edition. I said I'd do it by May, but I think it might be June.
Oh, okay. No rush. The way things are now, but do you think that each one, you calibrate them so that they sound the same? Like you said, Pit Viper is like God Eater, but a little bit less heavy. So do you think that each one,
no, that's not exactly true. Pit Viper is not like God Eater at all. Actually, it's a very different circuit. It's got a very different sound. They don't. My module, like the 3 distortion modules, sound completely different. I mean, I would not want to have something that is slightly similar, or things that are even like 20% similar, because nobody needs 3 of the same thing.
Right.
Yeah, they're very, very different in terms of circuitry and sound.
You did a limited run of 100 or something. Does each one have like its own kind of personality out of those?
No, not really.
Okay.
So honestly, I'm not a big fan of that. I would really like, I mean, it's cool to have, say, each one has its own thing, or each one has its own sound, but I'm really not a big fan of Mojo stuff personally. from in the point of view of me doing it myself, because what I would like is that if tomorrow somebody picks up a pit viper in another part of the world for a recording session or something, it should sound exactly the same like the one they've got back home.
Sure.
If like if there's too much variation, then it becomes more it's not something that remains dependable for me. And it's nice that each of them sounds great. I think the only pedal that's had its own character from unit to unit has been the chemical burn, because each one had to be matched differently, basically. But I generally tend to use modern components. I don't use any vintage components except for in the Aurobus, the tubes. So yeah, changing the tubes will give you a different sound, because that always does happen with vacuum tubes. But going like say between pit vipers, there's actually no difference if you pick up a pit viper from the same series between the units. No.
Okay. Just wondering. I'm just really curious about all this stuff, and it's so amazing how it works. So, and there are three different distortion modules. Each one has its own special circuit that you wrote, right? So,
Yeah.
what do you write them in? It's like a software program, or is it?
Oh no, distortion is all analog. So it's actually transistors and chips, integrated circuits, so stuff like this. So it's not written, it's more like designed and routed. I don't have any digital modules. I guess the Coma reactor delay does use a digital delay chip, the very famous PT2399. But other than that, there's no code in any of my distortions, except for maybe the switching or something.
That's good. So that sounds
It's
more.
all analog. Yeah, I think I think it can be done. Distortion can be done in software, but it's just never like the only distortion I really like is Sound Toys. The Sound Toys plugins are fantastic. It's actually the only VST plugins that I use at all, except for a compressor and limiter, are Sound Toys. It's their stuff is just fantastic. But I always feel that there's something about distortion that is very hard to replicate in software. I'm not saying impossible, and I'm not saying it won't be done, because people are making some incredible distortion emulation, like Douglas, the bass pedal company. Doug Douglas, the founder, has kind of like gone off into something called Neural DSP, and which is simulation of amplifiers and amp distortion, and it just sounds incredible. For what it does, just plug and go to the studio, plug your thing in, you're done. But I just prefer, there's something about like if you're not like looking to bang something out, and if it's something that people will listen to and something that you're actually going to get drawn into, I feel that there's something about analog distortions that can't be like you lose something in the digital process.
Yes.
Not just in digital. I love digital. I think it's fantastic. There's so much you can do in the digital space that you just cannot do in the analog space. But when it comes to distortion, I'm kind of I have a heart for analog. I have a very soft spot for analog.
A purist. I like analog too. It just sounds so different. I mean, I think I can tell the difference for sure. Like I have my Harvestman Polyvox filter. Well, not in this case, the other one.
Yep.
And I think
Yeah, I mean,
uses a combination of both components. You can definitely hear that it's digital, I think.
Yeah. I mean, with the Polyvox filters, there's a I don't have the Harvestman. I have the Erica Sense Black Polyvox, and it's just so raw and ragged that so all my oscillators, all of them are digital. But then once they go through an entire like analog signal path, there's they just like I wouldn't be able to tell if there was an analog oscillator back there or not. Maybe I would actually, but I don't think I would care as much because for me it's just more of the processing and not so much the source.
Hmm.
I like a lot of effects, and I think that's what kind of does it for me. But I love the Polyvox sound. The Polyvox filter sound is just so crazy and gnarly
Me
and
too.
so ragged. It's just like um, I haven't heard the Harvestman Polyvox, but I love Scott Yeager's stuff. It's just um, things like the Piston Honda. Um,
Yeah,
it's just yeah. I want
amazing.
one. One of these at some point. I know I'm going to get one at some point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing stuff. It's one of my favorites for sure. The Hertz Donut. I think the Piston Honda was
Mm,
one of the first modules I got to have a play on when I had assembled my first experimentation, learn how to use case. Yeah.
mm.
But when I bought the Polyvox oscillator in Schneider's Lotted in 2015, and it's been my favorite ever since. It's my favorite oscillator.
Yeah. The Piston Honda, I think, was one of the first oscillators or the first modules I ever saw, in fact, at Schneider's Lawton. And it was I was completely new to Eurorack and modular. I had absolutely no context. I mean, I had understood and worked with modular synthesis and software, um, starting from I think Propeller Head Reason. So uh, Reason is actually where I learned everything. I didn't have any access to any synthesizers growing up, and it's not like there's a very small synth community in India. It's nothing like what you'd see in any part of the Western world, actually. So I got my hands on Propeller Head Reason, and it's at some point like I hit the tab button, and that's when the entire screen flips and shows you the back of the rack, and then there's all these little
Yeah, the
inputs and
wires.
outputs that you can route.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, this is cool, and it suddenly just opened up everything. Suddenly um, you're going in there with a knife
Yeah.
and
The little cartoon
doing
wires.
things.
Yeah.
That's
You
right. Yeah.
stack up like 5 maelstroms and I don't know. Yeah, I remember using.
Yeah, and that was my favorite. Actually, like taking like a whole bunch of maelstroms and then cross patching them and creating these weird infinite feedback loops that would run regardless of whether you press play or not, and you just have like this weird like sound wash coming over you. Um,
Yeah.
and this was way before like I got anything. I even knew what Eurorack was. Yeah, so that's how I learned, I guess, about modular synths.
Yeah. I did a little Maximus P before I ever saw the modular synth, and then when you saw it, when I first saw it, I was like, well, now Maximus P makes more sense, but because of the
Yeah.
ins and outs, the little objects with the top is the in and the bottom is the out, and you gotta it's too much in the computer.
Mm.
But anyways, so I guess we've been going for a while here. I'm gonna put the link to your website in the comments so people can check out your all your stuff, which is amazing stuff, and I
Sure.
can't wait
Thanks.
to have a play again. My friend has a God
Thank you.
Eater. I gotta swipe it from him, put it in my rack. Trade
Yeah,
for module.
Yeah, it'll be out. I think another 4 weeks is when I should have a small batch, most of which is going to Europe. But then I'm just going to hang on to like 10 or something at that point, and then do maybe another run after that. So,
Well,
so yeah.
I'm following your Instagram, even though, yeah, this I'll give you a shout. Let's see, 2022. We'll see you there, hopefully.
I hope so. Yeah, I really, really hope so. It's been, yeah, I can't believe it'll be like 2021. Yeah, so like 2 years, 3 years actually, since the last one.
Yeah,
We got to see that community again.
yeah, it's great.
But yeah,
Nothing quite like it. Well, I hope to see you there. Well, what else? uh, I want to say thank you so much for coming
oh
on.
no, thank you. The pleasure is mine. Thank you so much.
Okay.
This is a very, very cool. Thank you for having me.
Fascinated to hear about your stuff, and I love your modules, and look forward to seeing
Thank
more.
you so much.
Okay.
Yeah. I hope to see the new stuff at in 22. Then
Yes. I'll see you
there
there.
will be new stuff.
Wonderful.
Take care and stay safe, stay healthy.
Likewise. Okay, Aditya. See you later.
Ciao. See you.